Close Encounters of the Third Kind is the grandfather of modern sci-fi contact stories. When it dropped in November 1977, it rewired how we imagined first contact with aliens. But here's the thing, the version you remember watching might not be the version Spielberg actually wanted you to see. In fact, there are 3 completely different endings floating around. And for years, the one everyone watched was the one the director came to regret most. Today, we're uncovering 15 hidden truths about Close Encounters, including the secret battle between Steven Spielberg and Columbia Pictures over whether the aliens should stay mysterious or reveal themselves completely. And stick around, because we'll expose the darker, edgier script that was supposed to kick off this entire production, and why Spielberg threw it in the trash. Number 1. The ending that shouldn't exist. The theatrical version of Close Encounters ended with Roy Neary boarding the mothership. You see him walk up the ramp, lights flash, he climbs inside, the ship ascends, credits roll, mystery intact. 3 years later, in 1980, Columbia Pictures paid Steven Spielberg $2.5 million to re-release the film and shoot entirely new sequences. But there was a catch. The studio executives demanded that Spielberg show the interior of the mothership. They wanted audiences to see inside the alien craft. They wanted spectacle. They wanted a reason to drag people back to theaters. Spielberg did it. He added 7 minutes of new footage showing the inside of the ship, crystalline chambers, impossible geometry. Roy's face lit up in wonder. But by the late 1990s, when Spielberg revisited the film for the 1998 director's cut, he'd completely changed his mind. He removed the interior sequence entirely. In interviews, Spielberg said plainly, "I never should have done that, because that should have always been kept a mystery, the inside of that ship." The executives won a marketing victory in 1980, but the artist won in 1998. For 30 years, the mothership interior was the only ending most people ever saw. Today, you can watch all 3 versions back to back and see exactly why Spielberg regretted breaking his own rule. Mystery sells once. Truth sells forever. Number 2. The Paul Schrader disaster that never was. Before Spielberg sat down to write Close Encounters, he gave the assignment to Paul Schrader, the screenwriter of Taxi Driver. Schrader delivered a script called Kingdom Come in 1973. It was about an Air Force lieutenant assigned to debunk UFO sightings who encounters one himself. Sounds solid, right? Spielberg read it and called it, and we quote, "one of the most embarrassing screenplays ever professionally turned into a major film studio or director." He threw it out completely. Spielberg decided to write the script himself from scratch. He brought in several other writers for rewrites. Jerry Belson, John Hill, David Giler, Hal Barwood, and Matthew Robbins all took cracks at it. But Spielberg kept control of the core vision. The difference between Schrader's failed draft and Spielberg's final script is the difference between a paranoid political thriller and a humanist wonder story. One is about government conspiracy. The other is about personal transformation. Spielberg chose wonder. And that choice defined the entire science fiction genre that followed. Number 3. Watch the Skies. The original title that died. The project started in late 1973, under a different name, Watch the Skies, lifted from a line in the 1951 B-movie, The Thing from Another World. Spielberg had pitched it as a low-budget documentary-style film about UFO believers. He quoted Columbia a price tag of $2.7 million. By the time production wrapped, that figure had exploded to $19.4 million. The scope kept growing. The special effects kept multiplying. Columbia was hemorrhaging money from other projects and desperately needed a hit. They needed Spielberg to deliver by November 1977 for cash flow reasons. The film that was supposed to be intimate and grounded became epic and operatic. Watch the Skies became Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the title change reflected a deeper artistic transformation, from a small story about obsession to a grand statement about human connection. Number 4. The actors who turned it down. Every major star in Hollywood got offered Roy Neary. Every single one said no. Steve McQueen was the first choice. He read the script and loved it, but told Spielberg he couldn't cry on cue. He didn't think he could pull off the emotional vulnerability the role demanded. Jack Nicholson turned it down because he worried the special effects would overshadow his performance. Gene Hackman passed because he was going through a divorce. Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and James Caan, all said no as well. Richard Dreyfuss was desperate for the part. While filming Jaws with Spielberg the year before, Dreyfuss overheard the director talking about Close Encounters. He started campaigning for the role relentlessly. Dreyfuss later said, quote, "I launched myself into a campaign to get the part. I would walk by Steve's office and say stuff like, Al Pacino has no sense of humor, or Jack Nicholson is too crazy. I eventually convinced him to cast me." Spielberg's first choice had already rejected him. His best option was the guy who wanted it most. That's how Richard Dreyfuss became Roy Neary. Not because he was the studio's top pick, but because he was willing to fight for it. Number 5. One Take Carrie End. The 3-year-old prodigy. Cary Guffey was cast as Barry Geiler at just 3 years old. The kid was a natural. He nailed scene after scene in a single take. The crew nicknamed him One Take Carrie. Spielberg actually had a t-shirt made with the nickname printed on it, and gave it to Guffey as a keepsake. Spielberg used method acting techniques on a 3-year-old to get authentic responses. He created real situations, genuine surprise, real wonder, actual fear, and captured the child's genuine reactions. The result was one of the most believable child performances in cinema history. Cary Guffey's work on Close Encounters was so strong that Stanley Kubrick wanted to cast him as Danny Torrance in The Shining just years later. A 3-year-old had impressed one of the world's most demanding directors so thoroughly that another legendary filmmaker wanted to work with him. That's not luck, that's raw talent. Number 6. Meryl Streep auditioned and lost. Terry Garr was cast as Roy Neary, Roy's increasingly frustrated wife. But she wasn't the studio's first choice. Multiple actresses auditioned for the role, including a then-unknown Yale Drama School graduate named Meryl Streep. Yes, that Meryl Streep. Spielberg saw Terry Garr in a coffee commercial. He was struck by her ability to convey a whole emotional landscape in 30 seconds. The way she could shift from happiness to sadness to yearning, all within a single commercial break. He thought, that's the actress who can play a woman watching her marriage fall apart on screen. Streep went on to become one of the greatest actors of all time. Garr delivered a powerhouse performance in Close Encounters. Both actresses went on to have extraordinary careers. But in 1976, Spielberg trusted a coffee commercial over Streep's resume, and he was right. Number 7. François Truffaut, the director who refused to act. Spielberg wanted to cast a French actor as Claude Lacombe, the French government scientist leading the Alien Contact Initiative. The character was based on real UFO researchers Jacques Vallée and Claude Poher. Spielberg approached several French actors, Lino Ventura, Yves Montand, Jean-Louis Trintignant. They all said no. Then Spielberg got the courage to ask François Truffaut, one of his cinematic heroes and the founder of the French New Wave. Truffaut was skeptical about appearing in a big Hollywood blockbuster, but he admired Spielberg's work. He agreed to the role on one condition. He told Spielberg, "I am not an actor. I can only play myself." Spielberg replied, "That's exactly what I want." Truffaut signed on for $75,000. He delivered a performance that's simultaneously understated and magnetic. Truffaut never did write the book on acting he'd planned to research during the production, but he gave Spielberg something more valuable, a masterclass in quiet authority on screen. Number 8. The 5-note motif that took 350 attempts. John Williams composed the 5-note motif that serves as the alien's communication signal. But he didn't nail it on the first try, or the second, or the 50th. Williams worked with composer and mathematician to calculate how many 5-note combinations existed in the chromatic scale. The answer? 134,000. Williams and Spielberg decided to narrow it down to 350 variations and listen to each one individually. They sat together, over and over, playing 5-note sequences until something clicked. The notes they chose, in solfège, ré, mi, do, do, so, are simple, memorable, and slightly off-kilter. They feel otherworldly, precisely because they're not quite right. The 5-note motif became one of the most iconic sounds in cinema history. It appears in Star Tours at Disneyland. It's referenced in dozens of films. But none of it happens without Williams composing 349 versions that Spielberg rejected. Number 9. The budget catastrophe that nearly killed the film. Columbia greenlit Close Encounters with an open-end budget upwards of $7 million in 1975. By the time production started, Spielberg had quoted $2.7 million. By mid-production in 1976, the budget had escalated to $11.5 million. By the time shooting wrapped, it sat at $19.4 million. That's 7 times the original estimate. The producers cited IATSE union raises, increasing actor costs, and the expanding scope of the effects work. Spielberg kept adding to his vision. The practical effects were expensive and time-consuming. Lightning storms and hurricanes damaged the Alabama sound stages. Producer Julia Phillips eventually got fired, partly for drug use that derailed the production. One Columbia executive later said that if the studio had known the true cost up front, Close Encounters would never have been greenlit. Instead, they gambled, and it paid off to the tune of $300 million worldwide. But for a studio in financial crisis in 1976, $19.4 million felt like a knife to the chest. Number 10. The tax shelter hack that started production in December. Here's a weird piece of film history. Close Encounters' first scene was shot on December 29, 1975, at an air traffic control center in Palmdale, California. Then production stopped cold. Filming didn't resume again until May 1976. Why the 6-month gap? Tax shelter law. Columbia Pictures needed to start production before December 31, 1975, to qualify for a tax break. But they didn't have the full budget, or the sets, or the principal actors ready. So Spielberg shot one scene, the air traffic control sequence at Palmdale, with no stars, no sets to construct, and real air traffic controllers from the facility playing themselves. Then everything shut down, until the studio could actually afford to continue. After the gap, production resumed at a proper pace. But that weird December jumpstart scene is the legacy of late 70s Hollywood tax strategy. Even art has to answer to accountants. Number 11. The real air traffic controllers, Spielberg cast. Most of the dialogue in the Palmdale Air Traffic Control Tower sequence is spoken by actual air traffic controllers from the Los Angeles Art CC facility. David Anderson, Richard L. Hawkins, Craig Shreve, and Bill Thurman played themselves essentially, speaking real jargon and radio protocols they used every single day. Spielberg learned this trick from his own experience. If you want authenticity, cast the real thing. He did the same thing years later with E.T., casting real doctors from USC to deliver the medical dialogue. When audiences hear air traffic controllers in Close Encounters, using terminology that feels completely natural, it's because it is natural. These weren't actors pretending to know the lingo. They were the actual people doing the job. That's why those scenes feel so grounded and real, compared to the rest of the film's otherworldly spectacle. Number 12. The darker original concept. Spielberg abandoned. Spielberg's initial story outline for what became Close Encounters was far darker. It centered on a police officer or military officer working on Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official 1950s and 60s study of UFO reports. The officer would become a whistleblower, exposing a government conspiracy to hide alien contact from the public. The original title was Watch the Skies, and the story was structured as a political thriller, with Watergate-era paranoia running through it. By the mid-70s, Watergate was still fresh in the national consciousness. The idea of a corrupt government covering up the truth had teeth. But Spielberg gradually shifted the story away from conspiracy and toward wonder. He moved the protagonist from a cop to an ordinary electrical lineman. He replaced governmental deception with governmental discovery. The final film is about connection, not cover-up. The aliens aren't a threat to expose. They're an invitation to transcendence. That tonal shift, away from darkness and toward light, is what made Close Encounters resonate. Spielberg chose optimism over paranoia, and the world responded. Number 13. The director's 3 attempts to get it right. Close Encounters exists in 3 distinct versions, and Spielberg's attitude toward the film changed dramatically with each cut. The 1977 theatrical release runs 135 minutes. It's Spielberg's first pass, rushed out because Columbia was bleeding money and needed a holiday release. In 1980, Spielberg got $2.5 million to recut and add new material for a theatrical re-release. He tightened pacing by cutting some Roy and family scenes, added the lost World War II ships in the Gobi Desert, and shot the mothership interior sequence that Columbia demanded. This special edition runs 132 minutes, slightly shorter than the theatrical, but with new spectacle added. By 1998, Spielberg had time and perspective. He assembled the director's cut by by taking his favorite elements from both previous versions, restoring the family drama he'd initially cut, adding the Gobi Desert sequence, but removing the mothership interior he now regretted. The director's cut runs 137 minutes, the longest version. It's considered the definitive version. Spielberg was essentially saying, "I made 3 different films because I kept changing my mind about what this story should be, and I finally got it right." Number 14. Kubrick's interest in Cary Guffey. After Close Encounters wrapped, word got around about the incredible performance delivered by 3-year-old Cary Guffey. Stanley Kubrick, working on The Shining, wanted to cast Guffey as Danny Torrance, the young boy at the center of the film. It didn't happen. Kubrick ultimately cast Danny Lloyd instead, and Lloyd delivered an iconic performance. But the fact that Kubrick wanted Guffey tells you everything about how seriously the kid's work was taken. Kubrick doesn't cast lightly. He's notoriously demanding and exacting. The fact that he was interested in Guffey meant the 3-year-old was viewed as a legitimate talent, not just a cute kid who nailed a few scenes. Guffey went on to appear in several more films, including The Amazing Spider-Man and the Twilight Zone movie, but never quite recaptured the lightning-in-a-bottle perfection of his Close Encounters debut. Number 15. What you actually misremember about the ending. Most people who saw Close Encounters in theaters after 1980 saw the special edition. For decades, it was the only version available on VHS. As a result, an entire generation's memory of the film is locked to the mothership interior sequence. If you remember seeing the inside of the ship, with those crystalline formations and Roy's wonder-struck face, you probably saw the special edition. But here's the thing, people often misremember which version they saw. They confuse the theatrical ending with the special edition ending. They're not sure if they're remembering the original mysterious conclusion or Spielberg's later spectacle. That's a kind of natural Mandela effect, a collective false memory shaped by which cut circulated most widely in the home video era. When the director's cut came out in 1998 and removed the mothership interior, people were genuinely shocked. Wait, that scene I've been remembering for 20 years was only added in 1980. Yes, it was. Your memory of the ending isn't wrong. It's just locked to a different version than Spielberg's original vision. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is ultimately about the cost of transformation. Roy Neary abandons his wife and children to chase wonder. The film never condemns him for it. It celebrates him. Spielberg made that choice deliberately, from a place of youth and hunger. By 1998, after becoming a father, Spielberg looked back at his own ending and flinched. The film he made in 1977 wasn't wrong. It was just incomplete. A young man's dream of escape and transcendence. Here's the question. If that mothership landed tonight and the door opened, would you walk through it? Or would you turn back to the people waiting for you on the ground? Spielberg's answer to that question changed between 1977 and 1998. But the film's power comes from the fact that he was brave enough to ask it at all. Hit subscribe, because every week we uncover the secrets Hollywood buried in the films you thought you knew.